Folks, before we start talking politics, I want you to look at the map because this story is not really about one tanker. It's about Kharg Island. And Kharg Island sits very far inland inside of the Persian Gulf. It's a very protected area, as you see there. And as we zoom in, I want you to see these oil tank storage facilities. And there are no ships at these piers right now. And all of these tanks are full of oil. And that's what keeps this country running. And this story's about Kharg Island. The little dot in the Persian Gulf is Iran's oil lifeline. It's a place where Iran's money, leverage, shipping routes, sanctions games, and war pressure all meet the water. And now, according to U.S. Central Command, American forces just disabled a ship that was trying to get oil out of that area. American forces just disabled the Botswana-flagged oil tanker, the MT Lexie, as it was headed towards Kharg Island. CENTCOM says the crew ignored repeated warnings over a 24-hour period. And how did the United States stop it? From an aircraft-fired Hellfire missile. A U.S. aircraft fired a Hellfire missile into the ship's engine room. Now let that sink in. That is not a strongly worded statement. This is not an email to Hezbollah. This is not a phone call. That is not some diplomatic letter sent through Switzerland. That is the United States saying this blockade is real. The warnings are real, and if you try to run it, you're not getting through. The media sees a tanker. The Navy sees a route. The media sees a flag on the back of the ship. The Navy sees where that ship was going, who benefits if it gets there, and what it means for Iran's ability to keep moving money through the Persian Gulf. That is why the map matters. And folks, the map does not lie. This is where the headline meets the shipping lane. Now, here is what we know. U.S. Central Command says the MT Lexie was unladen, meaning it was not carrying oil at the time. It was transiting international waters towards Kharg Island. CENTCOM says the crew ignored repeated warnings and failed to comply. And with U.S. directions given to them multiple times over a 24-hour period. Then a U.S. aircraft disabled the vessel by firing a Hellfire missile into the engine room, preventing the tanker from reaching Iran, from reaching Kharg Island. They were not firing to sink this ship. They were firing to disable it and prevent it from picking up this oil that Iran needs to have sold to keep funding their efforts. CENTCOM also says this is part of the blockade that began April 13th against maritime traffic entering and exiting Iranian ports. And according to CENTCOM, U.S. forces have now disabled 6 commercial vessels, redirected over 130 others, while the ceasefire with Iran continues. That is the headline. But the real story is much bigger, because Kharg Island is not just another Iranian port. Kharg Island is the cash register sitting in salt water. This island has long been the center of Iran's oil export system. It is where tankers load, where the regime converts oil into cash, and where their pressure campaign meets the global economy. If Iran cannot move oil through Kharg Island, Iran's got a real problem. And their problem is that they don't have any money coming in. And whenever you have no money coming in, the people working for your regime are going to quit. This is not a public relations problem. This is not a talking point problem. This is a money problem. And if regimes like Iran do not survive on speeches, they survive on cash, oil, intimidation, weapons, smuggling routes, and leverage. So when the United States starts stopping vessels headed towards Kharg Island, that's not random. That is pressure at the point of the maximum pain. And this is exactly what needed to occur. The longer that this happens, the longer that they cut off their ability to gain money, their problems multiply. And I want to be very clear. This is not a video celebrating a commercial vessel getting hit. There are sailors on those ships. There are legal questions. There are escalation risks. There are diplomatic consequences. And anytime a missile is fired into a commercial vessel in international waters, that is a serious matter. But this is also not a normal shipping environment. This is a blockade. This is a ceasefire that is still fragile. This is a regional conflict where Iran has used shipping lanes, drones, missiles, proxies, and oil pressure as weapons. And when a vessel ignores repeated warnings for 24 hours and keeps heading towards a blockaded Iranian port, the United States has to make a choice. Either the blockade means something or it doesn't. And it's believed to be that the aircraft that fired that Hellfire missile came off the Abraham Lincoln. They're saying they've redirected 122 commercial vessels. This is the Abraham Lincoln, a very loaded for war ship. And either the warning is real or it's just noise. And weakness at sea gets expensive real fast. Now, I want you to look at that weapon of choice right here. The aircraft carrier, the Abraham Lincoln. And then I want you to look at the damage that was done to that engine room. If they wanted to sink that ship, they could sink it. And that's important. They didn't appear to be trying to sink the ship. They were trying to stop it. That tells you the mission. It was not annihilation. It was not to kill the sailors on board that ship. It was not to injure. It was to disable. This was enforcement, not annihilation. A precision strike into the engine room is a military way of saying you're not going to Iran today. And that message is not just for the MT Lexie. That message is for every ship captain, every owner, and every insurer, every port operator, every shadow fleet middleman, and every buyer thinking about testing the blockade. This is a message to England. This is a message to Lloyd's of London that is insuring these things. The message is simple. Do you really want to be the next ship that ignores 24 hours of warning? Do you want to find out if the U.S. military is bluffing? I don't believe so. We got a lot of headlines coming out of Iran. The next one we've got is Iran has announced plans for a 3-day funeral for the slain leader, the Ayatollah Khomeini, which events in Tehran and Mashhad where he will be buried. A 3-day public burial. This is going to be a celebration of life for one of the most heinous, vile, and dangerous dictators to ever walk the planet. He has killed thousands of his own people. And now somebody's finally doing something about it. The President of the United States has come out this afternoon and has dismissed reports that Iran and the U.S. have halted contacts. It looks like here, Donald Trump just posted this afternoon. Fake news reports that the Islamic Republic of Iran and the USA stopped speaking a few days ago. Says they're false and erroneous. The conversations between us have been going on continuously, including 4 days ago, 3 days ago, 2 days ago, 1 day ago, and today. Where they lead, no one knows. But as I told Iran, it's time one way or another for you to make a deal. You've been doing this for 47 years, and it cannot be allowed to go on any longer. This message from the president, along with the 120 plus vessels that have been redirected, the 6 that have been disabled, and now this ship right at the shores of Kharg Island being stopped. Some people are going to call this a war crime. Those arguments are going to get louder, especially because this vessel was flagged to Botswana and was operating in international waters. But this post by President Trump, alongside this disabling of the ship, this tells you The Trump administration means business. It tells you that this was done with purpose, and a vessel can fly one country's flag, be owned through another country, insured somewhere else, operated by a shell company, and still serve Iran's strategic interests. That is called a shadow fleet, and that's how a shadow fleet works. Now, you've got former Senator, now Secretary of State, Marco Rubio, testifying before Congress today about what is happening in the Middle East, what's happening in the Persian Gulf.
Let me try to give this answer to you in a way that's not boring or wonky, because it's been a shift. Obviously, the original Supreme Leader, the one that was there, is no longer with us. His son takes over. Nobody hears from him for a month. By all reports, open source reporting, I think you've all seen it, he was severely injured in the same strike, and so forth.
Are you confident he's still alive, by the way?
Yeah, I think there's indications that, in fact, we've not heard from him publicly. We haven't seen him publicly, and I would imagine, given what's happened to multiple leaders in that system, being very public is probably not.
Do you think that this leader of the Iranian regime, Ayatollah Mojtaba Khomeini, is still alive? We haven't seen him. There are some indications provided here by the Secretary of State, Marco Rubio, but we don't have proof of life on this. And that is a very, very important situation that's unfolding. Because with all of this happening in the Middle East, in the Persian Gulf, with them disabling a ship, who are we dealing with? I think right now, we don't know who we're dealing with. We don't know who we're negotiating with. I'm sure that the Secretary of State and the President have a better idea. But as a country, as a nation, I don't think we know. And I don't want to lose confidence in our government. I don't want to lose confidence in our military. I don't want to lose confidence in the President or the Secretary of State. And when you do something like this to an Iranian tanker, or it's going to get filled up with Iranian oil, it sends a message to Iran. It sends a message to the IRGC. It sends a message to whoever's in charge there. And more importantly, I think it sends a real message to the American people, you and I, that we know that our government, our president, our Secretary of State, and our military mean business. It's time to continue to hold this evil regime accountable. It's time to move forward with some kind of talks. And it's time to remove how this regime operates. So no, the flag on that ship doesn't mean anything. The question is, where was the vessel going? What warnings did it receive? What blockade rules were in effect? And who benefits if it got through? That's the analysis. That's why you do not just look at the ship. You look at the route. And the route was towards Kharg Island. Now, why does this matter to Americans sitting at home? Because this is not some faraway dot on a map that has nothing to do with your life. This is energy security. This is gas prices. This is whether the Strait of Hormuz stays open. This is whether Iran gets to pressure the world economy every time it wants sanctions. This is whether American troops in the region are protected by real deterrence, with the possibility of some point putting boots on the ground at Kharg Island. And this is whether the United States is willing to enforce its own red lines or allow Iran to continue to be a bully in the Middle East. They threaten shipping, they threaten oil, they threaten the Strait, they use proxies, they use drones, they use plausible deniability. And let's not even get into the conversation of all the American men and women that have lost their life because of previous actions over the last 47, 48 years. That's not diplomacy. That is blackmail with a press release. The American people have seen this movie before. Iran creates instability, and then they demand concessions to stop the instability. That is like an arsonist demanding a fire department contract. The current regime, the current president, they're not aligning on this. You want access to the sea lanes, and stop using sea lanes as weapons. You want the Strait of Hormuz open, and stop treating it like Tehran's personal toll booth. And Kharg Island's the key pressure point, because if Iran cannot count on tankers getting in and out, everything changes. Insurance, shipping behavior, buyers get nervous. China has to calculate risk. Shadow fleet operators start asking whether the payday is worth the missile. That is why I keep saying, this map matters. The media wants to talk about personalities. Trump said this. Iran said that. Some diplomat leaked this. Some analysts called it that. Fine, that all matters. But before we talk politics, look at the map. The map shows you the choke point. The map shows you the port. The map shows you the route. The map shows you why Kharg Island's not just a place. It is the pressure valve for Iran's oil system. And right now, that pressure valve is being squeezed. Now, there's another layer here, and we're going to get to that later on. More about the blockade. Thank you for watching, and I'll see you in the next one.